Now it is my privilege to introduce tonight's artist and speaker, Willy Heeks. According to his website, Mr. Heeks' works explore complex spatial relationships through the use of pattern, organic line, and sensuous fields of color. That is a very apt and succinct description for works that explore ethereal spaces, nature, and personal narrative. Among his various accomplishments, Mr. Heeks' artwork has been exhibited in over 150 group and 60 individual exhibitions in the United States and Europe. His work has appeared in galleries from Portland, Oregon to Providence, Rhode Island, from Bay Harbor Islands, Florida to Missoula, Montana. His work is held by various museums and institutions. The list is very long and impressive, but to name just a few: Brooklyn Museum of Art, the Corcoran Museum of Art in Washington, D.C., Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, Michigan, and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. During his career, Mr. Heeks has garnered many awards and received many grants. He was the recipient of 2 Pollock Krasner Foundation grants in 1997 and again in 2004. He has been awarded artist fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts in 1978, 1987, and 1989, as well as the Visual Artist Fellowships from the Yaddo Artist Colony in 1980 and 1984. And he is also the second cousin to Phil Brooks. So that is another one of his accomplishments. So, this is just a partial list of his many accomplishments and accolades. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to present to you Willy Heeks.
I'm very humbled and thankful for being invited to this speaker series. My thanks goes out to everyone from IMAGO Gallery. The proximity of where we are is very important to me. I grew up partly in Bristol, Rhode Island when I was a kid. I think it was like 2 years ago, I had an exhibit at the Bristol Art Museum. It took a few years to conjure up what I would do for that exhibit. And in doing so, it drew up a lot of memories of my life in Bristol, my life in Rhode Island. Very meaningful, very impactful, and adventurous in some ways. I'd like bring some of that into this event because a lot of the thick soup of inspiration comes from my childhood and is still in my most recent work. And it's not a literal concept, but it's a stirring kind of inspiration. So I was born in Providence, grew up in foster homes from the age of 3 to the age of 18 in numerous foster homes. And actually, 4 of them, I think alone, were in Bristol. That restlessness as a child somehow got to be a vehicle for maybe daring the working process in painting. It's like, what do you have to lose? And then adjustment, those sorts of psychological things. But also geographically, and the ocean has been huge. Even when I lived in New York for 20 years, my work continued to be connected to nature, connected to the world around me in every way, like small ways, little visual things that somehow have a way of being stored in your mind and come out as a kind of a slant when you go to paint. They somehow emerge. In my early years I was in ungraded school, and there was a lot of, at the Children's Center, and that was once a Children's Center in Providence, and they had an ungraded school situation where you would go and instead of giving you specific instruction, they would say, well, we really don't know what to do with you guys, so just go and draw. It was always that corner, which like packed full of crayons and paper, and so that became a kind of my recluse, even living with 30 other kids in a cottage, and all those children. It's sort of a community, and so drawing is very much of a childhood practice, but I think I felt in my case what was dawned on me even at that age was that some of the other children around me would say, yeah, make me one, I want one, I want one. So it became like a little bit like, oh, maybe just make pictures for people. So then moving on and growing up in Bristol, I was, I think it was 9th or 10th grade, and I was in a classroom, the art classroom, with a certain art teacher who was, he was kind of older then and had been around teaching for a long time, and I sort of felt like I was one of his favorites, but he really liked rendering, and like if you could be more specific, the better, and all that stuff. And then at some point, this person who was the new art teacher next door to that room was an art teacher who I guess had been discussing how to trade me, like a baseball player. So like Emil Ferrara, who came through that door, and he said to me, and he's very tall and very powerful looking, you know, he said, would you like to learn how to draw? And I looked at my drawings and I said, yes, I do. So it's like a thirst. So he recognized in me that maybe what I was doing was like what he needed to do to me, like the professor. It's like unravel all that tightness that was in the drawings at that age, which I think is a very important age for creative development anyway, and urged me to look into, here, take 10 art books home for the weekend of his own art books, and making me look at the history of art. And it just dawned on me that it was like this, somebody had taken the top of my head off and put all this great stuff inside of it. And I owe it to him as to how I've developed. It just could have been a passing, but it was his interest, and he would like give me wads of paper to take home on weekends and say, come back with 200 drawings and no more than 3-minute drawings. No more than 3-minute drawings. So we had the cows, the chickens, the barn, the tractors, all that stuff to draw, like a lot of subject. And so I began doing that, and I got involved in like writing poetry and all that nice gooey stuff. But he made me where I said, do people actually do this? When I went back to school, I think after a weekend, I said, do actually people, like Andy Warhol does this stuff? I mean, that was all of at that age, that was all of the pop artists were coming up, and I said, wait, you can do this if you want to? And he said, yes, you can. So from then, he was extremely important to me. I shipped off to the University of Rhode Island, where there was a really good core faculty, very vigorous at the time. It was 1968 or 69. And there were, the building there, which is ugly as sin now, was new. But anyway, there were a great group of people, and I went to school there. And that was very powerful too. And they were like, wow, how did you get this portfolio of entry? And I said, I don't know. My high school art teacher helped me with it, but I did all the work. And so Emil prepared me for college. And then came, like, I was in sculpture at that point in college, but experimenting with a lot of stuff, film, photography. When I graduated, I was encouraged to apply to the Whitney Museum program in New York, which is like independent study. It was just like up and pack up your stuff and go to New York. So I got in. I got accepted into it, and I remember I said I had to give up so much to go to New York. My surfboard, my dog, my van, and a girlfriend. There's a lot of sacrifice there. And it was torture at the time. New York was like really, Soho was still a mess, like not like it is anymore. But the program itself was incredibly intense and taught me how to open up just the making of painting, or I wasn't doing painting, but I was doing, I mean, my portfolio for the application was mixed with solo performance work, photography pieces and stuff. There was no painting in it. But the program taught me to, like, hey, taking it seriously, not to the uptight element, but really try to go deep with what your thought processes are with your work. And it was a very chatty, intellectualized, sometimes overly intellectualized program, but still, and the experiences from that were immense. And I came away from that like a little bit lost, because after that it wasn't, first of all, you know, living in New York, working at galleries to make money, all that stuff. It was another adjustment to leave that and leave New York at that age, and like, okay, what do you do now? Everybody knows that feeling, wherever you to leave from somewhere and start over again. It was an ambivalent period where there was no place to work. I had no intent on painting. I had no, it's more like living life. Moved on to, of all places, hitched a ride to Chicago, became a mover for, a unionized mover, furniture mover for Mayflower. And then, I was like sleeping on a floor of a friend's apartment in Chicago. And I said, look, I'm just going to stay here for 2 weeks, because I got into graduate schools. Okay, here you go. I got into graduate schools and said, I don't want to go. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready just to keep the academic ball rolling, as to, like, I was unsure. And I wanted a piece of real life. Well, I got it. But I did enjoy it. I did enjoy that. I don't know if you call that time out or time in. But so anyway, it was a pretty fascinating experience. And I had so little time to work. So what I did was anything in the house, there wasn't an object in the house that wasn't free of either my photographing it and then setting it up and animating it with another object. and just photographing these piles of things next to each other and writing on the wall, and I don't know, using all kinds of things just to keep my mind going in that way. And it got a little frightening because I thought, oh my God, I'm in the middle of Chicago, and I kind of, 3 years is enough. It's cold out there. So then I applied to graduate school under the inspiration of Italo Scanga, who was a sculptor and an old friend of mine. I was doing those photographs of fish, like whole fish, and like sort of tied to my body, like, the type of thing you do every day. I was doing little performances with like Super 8 and doing things with like these fish and I don't know. That's a summary, but I know it seems kind of fishy. So I presented this to get into grad school, and I got into grad school, and it was exhilarating experience, but I felt like I already been in grad school. But by the time I got done with the Whitney and then going to grad school, it was a little bit like I felt like it was going backwards, and I was just playing in it and playing. I didn't finish grad school. I got restless and I moved to New York, and I said, I don't know what. I had tried to get back into New York like several times. I had odd jobs. I was taking care of horses, 100 head of horses a day, working in tree nurseries, any kind of physical work I loved, making money, going home, and then doing my little things that I could do, but that weren't super serious, but I knew that I was keeping going. So that's why I applied to grad schools, to get back east. And I got in, I spent a year, and then after several tries, got to move back into New York. But before I did that, I ventured on a mini career in performance art, which they were solo pieces, usually not verbal, not song and dance. It's like I'd build these sets and then have monologues recorded. I record all these things, but I would be set up with all these speaker systems, like on my body, through my eyeglasses. My trademark was a pair of eyeglasses that had speakers in them. And so I could stand here and, you'd hear a drum solo come out of my eyes. So that type of, it was based on sound, poetry, my little excerpts, verbal excerpts about painting. And so what happened was like these little performances, the subject matter became more about paint and painting and the inspiration of it. And I said, this is it. I stopped doing that. I spent a summer in Maine, and I said, and I did that for many years before that, but this time I just wanted to find a voice in painting, and it was the hardest thing to do. Scratching away at what I knew I was in tune with, and the closest things I could get to were I knew I wasn't somebody who could stand filling in blanks and just filling in the color, or conceptual processes. So I was lured to abstract expressionism, primarily Pollock, de Kooning, Motherwell, Klein, and then earlier people like Morris Lewis. And it was a really difficult summer. I produced these small paintings, went through them, had a bunch of them, and I so didn't. It took me. Those were the years where it took me time to develop a voice, and it was interesting because you think you know what you want to do the year before, and then you find it a year later. It's like that time lapse. That led me to back in New York doing construction work, day to day, carrying a bag on the subway with my saw and stuff. Then I had a little company, all artists that worked, had all the skills. So eventually, the other stuff started happening, and whenever we would complete a job, you'd have a month off, and you go, okay, everybody go back to your studios for a month, and that's the way it was, until you could build a body of work enough so that maybe you could have people starting to look at it and give you feedback, and things started picking up from there. So now we're like 1984 or somewhere. I mean, not the book. Anyway, did we already skip I skipped a painting somehow. Maybe the computer got tired of having that image up there. Okay, so now I'm just going to rattle through these. I think I'm done talking for a while, and then we'll take questions after. This painting is called Methodology. It's a really big painting. It's a small image, but it's, I don't know. Most of these paintings are in a 7-foot spectrum. Methodology, it's around 7 foot. Most of this work is within the last 2 years. And most of the work is oil and acrylic, and anything else I can get my hands on. Crayons, pencils. So you'll see some stuff in there. And I use stenciling process. So this painting is clearly 7.5 feet tall by about 6.5 feet. And you can see stenciling in a lot of places. And I use those as to get a different line, not just a painting line. I get a crisp line, to me it's like a drawing line. Work those in with the more liquid type of treatments and the more gestural. To set up the different planes that begin occurring with these. After you set up a pool of paint, the way I start is the canvases are clearly on the ground or the floor. I work outside in the summer, so all these paintings out on 4x4s and just splashing around and letting it dry and building a surface, building volume. I use acrylic in the beginning because it's helpful to let me arrive at a place where I can begin tying things together and building I call it building a painting. Creating the picture, creating the moment, it is a painting moment. I mean, paintings are moments, but then you can go into them, you can travel. That's what they become. And that wasn't on purpose. That sort of was like I think the way I dealt with like how abstract expressionism for me isn't an applaud to abstract expressionism. So to me, it's like a personal journey into these mindscapes that come about. And that feels like I've been there when they arrive. This one's called Theory. And you might ask, like, how do I get to title them? Well, in the beginning, when I started my painting career, most of my paintings were untitled because I thought, well, they don't need titles. They are what they are, and that's that. I got kind of tired of it because I had this attraction also to poetry and words, and I thought, So I kept a log of words that had resonance to me, and began, when I would look at a painting, I go through my books and I go, does this word kind of match that? And that's how it began. And I thought, yeah, basically these are all theories. I mean, you paint something, it's a theory of something. It's like something you believe in. So that's how this became theory, because it's right. It's the theory. This is called the research. Well, to get back to that, I started a group of work, and it was toward an exhibit, and the galleries, the galleries always like it when you have a title to your show. And so I thought, what? Why not just they get tired of recent paintings, new works on paper, recent works on paper. So I don't know. I go, okay, fine. So this was part of a body of work that came together, and I actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. So I called the title of the show My Findings. So this is my findings. So if you're a scientist, you go into the lab, or if you're doing any kind of research, you come back with your findings, the things you found out. And I thought, that's like painting. I mean, you're going into this thing, and you don't find it right away, and that's why you keep painting it until you find it. And then I thought, well, this is research. So that's the title of that painting, is The Research. And so it could be, it's the layering and twining deep, shallow space that you can look into, and those are all of the things that you found out. And those are the I'm looking at it. Those are the things that you find out. So that painting's about 84 inches tall. Prior to this body of work, I was more involved in just organic gesture. And then I thought I got involved in the spray paint element, but years before this. But now I started to use them as the gesture. So it's some of them are made of spray paint and others are painted by brush and tighter. So the spaces get, in that left area, that space gets more, it's thicker and it's harder, and it's somehow sitting in this menagerie of these other arrangements of things. So this is called Present Meanings, and it's approximately 74 by 72 inches.
The color palette in this one seems to have shifted from the few that you were showing before us. Do you have a method for developing the color palette for a series of work, or just...
Yep. No. No, Mary. Okay, that's it. That's the answer. No, it wasn't. It's not intentional. This was in that same body of work. I think what happens is when the painting gets underway, it tells me what it wants to do. It kind of helps me. And in this one, it's a little bit more of a, I don't say spiritual, but it's more an ephemeral, lifting feeling, and I was going with that upliftingness. And so it got to be more like twilight-ish. This one's called the Finding, and this was the sort of anchor painting in that exhibit. And I think all of the cross-hatching was like kind of, for me, a faceting and a fractalism that I like, that's been part of my work for a while, that kind of fractalizing spaces. And it looked quite scientific. So after I titled the show and everything, I came across something, I think Lois and I were in Picasso museums somewhere in Spain, and it was, oh my God, there was like this little thing on the wall that said that he called paintings my findings. He goes, that's what you do. You walk in there as if it's dark and painting, you find your way. I go, whoa, nothing's new. This was called the Ideal Green, and it's a little like, oh, what am I going to do with that green shape on the right that's so emphasizing, which in real life, you can't read the texture too much, but it's sort of built up above the canvas. So it's like this weird molten green shape. I said, I don't know what to call this painting. Oh, that's the Ideal Green. And that sort of stuck. This is called Studio Head, one word.
Feeling more scientific.
Yeah, more scientific. What do they call it? Like this. All the things that enter your head and the things that you think about and the things that you work on. And the distractions, go get a cup of coffee, go get a paper. This kind of felt clunky in a lot of ways. I was thinking about one of my favorite painters is Philip Guston. I have felt influenced by him, and I still feel inspired by him. But I felt this was very Gustonian. And I remember he did a series on this studio life with the light bulbs and the pile of shoes and the cigars. And so I thought, oh, this is kind of clunky like Augustine. So, and maybe some things emerged to me afterward that I didn't mean to make, but that looks like I made it. So, people come to the studio all the time and they go, oh my God, there's a horse in there. I go, no, there's no horse. Get out of here. Get on your horse. No, but weird things like that. And then sometimes I'll look for what they saw and I go, oh my God, is this imaginary horse in there that I never planned on putting in there? And as well as other things they say. And then I looked at this thing and I thought, oh my God, that shape of this shape, and it looks like a socket, like a big giant bulb, like a Christmas bulb. And by golly, every time I look at that thing, now I see the bulb. But it doesn't feel awkward. To some people, they probably thought that was intentional, but fine. This is called Eccentric Study. Again, that fastidiousness, that's why I titled it that. It's like, this one's kind of nagging, gestural convulsion of shapes that are edged up against each other, and how they can coexist and have their own space. But equally, when they do meet up against each other, the painting, they kind of merge into each other. So you can see that's a stencil of a hinge, a big farm hinge, and there's chicken wire spray through here. This painting is 7 foot tall too. But like there's a lot of impasto in this one, in that pink area, like thicker painting in the yellow up there, which you can't really pick up on the screen, but called Yellow Float. Smaller painting, 6 foot squarish. I usually don't paint square. That troubles me. Because I do have a turning process when they all start on the floor, all stretched out. And I got buckets of cans of different colors that I mix up acrylics, and that's how they start. But eventually, with more work, they go up on the wall. And as I'm working on them, and then the different phases of them, I will turn them, because sometimes you get so intent. I remember kind of discovering it for myself that I was having trouble with this one painting like eons ago. I mean, they all have problems, but I said, what am I going to do with this thing? It's not coming together. It's stuck. How do I unstick it? And for the most part, you just throw a bucket of turpentine on it and then get rid of it, which I had been doing. It's like, just dissolve it. But this time I turned it, and I turned it again. I go, oh, now I know what to do. And it's like, it all of a sudden said, thank you very much I didn't want to be down there. I wanted to be up here. And this energy now is like, yeah, you still have work to do to make that, into a cohesive piece. But it was that flipping it up and taking the chance. It's like the ball game is tied 1-1, it's the new game. This is called Painter's Painting, and it's around 7 foot tall too. Mostly, so here's a way that I took those drips that started up there, and there's a history of drips in painting that, back in the Rothko days and abstract expressionism, dripping paints that had drips on them were like, as a new painter, you appreciate them as that they become the holy, they're mournful. Drips are mournful, and there was such serious tone because it represented an action, and it was memorialized by people like Klein and de Kooning and various people like that. But now, somewhere in the 80s, I had this group of paintings going, and I had a studio visit by Stephen Green, who was a great painter, greater teacher than he was a painter, but he was really great. He taught Stella, and he was at Dartmouth for a long time, and he was friends with Guston and all that, but a very powerful teacher. I had him in graduate school. I was a sculpture major, but I took a painting class with him. Anyway, he came to a studio visit when I was set up in New York, and he said, you kind of like, what am I going to do with you? When he was looking at the paintings, and I said, what's the matter? And he said, the drips. There's too many of them. There's not enough of them. They're meaningless. I go, what do you mean? It's the the indication of hard-fought victory in a painting. No, they're not. He goes, let me tell you, too many is like you're crying too much, like too much weeping, too much sorrow, all those deep meanings behind drips and tearing and painting, and he goes, they don't work, that's it. They don't work in the painting. And he was right. So in this painting, why I call it Painter's Painting is because of him, and because I took, somehow or other, I didn't know what to do with that middle section up there with a display of green, but I loved it. And so down here, I just imitated that Oh yeah, they were coming right through that purple and right through there and down there and over there. And I extended it across the painting. And that red part is sort of an ode to Clifford Still, another one of my favorite painters. This is called Yellow Float. And I called it Yellow Float because there's a lot of yellow in there. It seemed to be, when I look at it, it's like I really liked French poetry, like Rimbaud and all that illusionary stuff. Those pictures that come on your mind when you read great romantic poetry. It's you're creating those pictures in your mind from reading. And so they're your own, but how that kind of romantic. So in a traditional sense, when I make my own painting and I'm done with it, I kind of feel like it's an adventure, like there's a picture there that is doing something. And this to me represented a flotation of that yellow group in a world like almost aquatic. So because you can go on to pure abstraction versus illusionary abstraction versus and what I liked is the famous quote, I think it was Philip Guston who said, they kept on talking about paintings. He goes, I'd rather you use the word pictures. And so I like that. So it's a humbleness that comes with looking at painting. It's a picture, it's a picture. Hold on. It doesn't have to be called this big word like painting all the time. So for me, that's why it's not pure, you're in a pool of painting and it's pure abstraction. And those folks don't like to do hardly anything. But if you have to do what your voice tells you, how you find your voice, so you can't be pinned down by like falling into categories. So that's why I'd always liked drawing cartoons too when I was a kid. I did a lot of cartooning. And so to me, the Disney thing is still alive in me somewhere. Yeah, this one's called Navigation. And that's around 6 foot high in the hinge. So in my studio, I have baskets full of and boxes full of all kinds of stuff that I've collected that I use as spray-throughs. Like I call them spray-throughs, stealing it from the sculptor David Smith, who did all of his work on paper. He made this iron sculpture, but all of his works on paper were scraps of metal that he would pick up off the floor and spray through them and create a picture by using all those pieces of metal. And I thought, that's perfect, spray through. It's not graffiti, it's to me, because I love drawing too, so that the quality of line is one thing Emile taught me. He said, what's beautiful about a drawing, any drawing, it's not how good it depicts the tree outside or the, whatever you're drawing. He said it's all in the line, so it's appreciation for the line. And so I attempt to get more graphic-y type of play in some of these if I want to articulate things as a whole shape. Like in this one, a little bit totemic, and then of course the hinges, but what the projection doesn't give you is how the paints come together. So this is like a solid, almost enamel yellow. It's probably flat and it's probably glossy. Navigation, I thought maybe because I do a lot of things title about the ocean, and so I thought of it as some kind of compass place. Here's one called From the Ocean. So to me, it just, I need to talk about the title too much, but this painting almost became completely white when I painted it, and when it went too far white, I could back up, or I could just like keep pushing the white until it almost became all white, and that's what I did. And these meshes of linear, almost molecular lines coming together. This painting's, I think, 7 foot on the side, 7 foot wide by 6.5 feet. This painting is one of Lois's favorites. Sublime Facets. And it's 108. Again, it's another one of these big guys. Like, ended up being an important painting for me at the time. I mean, it still is. I don't have it anymore, but it's in a good home. I say next to a Rothko on some wall in somebody's house next to a Rothko. He goes, that's not bad. I know it, but he doesn't know it. So the scale of it, again, is part of the whole thing, which you can't have at this point. But yeah, so Sublime Facets is, people call them mindscapes for me, and they go like, what are you on when you paint these things? But they are mindscapes or whatever, but an interaction. That's why I think that everything for me was everything that in your life is influential into your work. And pretty much whether you like it or not, I suppose that's probably true with most people. This one's called Eccentric Locations. It's a small painting. It's 4 foot, 4.5 foot. So some of these things get so, to me, eccentric, and sometimes I can't help it. So like where they go, but I want them to get to a point where there's kind of an understanding. When you see them, they seem, oh my God, yeah, that seems right. Even though it's eccentric and it's a location. The paintings can be windows to the world, they're locations, or they're frozen cinema, filmic, scenes. It's a scene from a stoppage in your mind, painted. This last one's called Journal. It's quite a lot of drawing in this one. This is around 6.5 feet wide. And I do these things where I go out and grab branches off trees and bring them in, and I don't know, it memorializes to me the connection I have to, not like that's nature, because I spray right through the leaves, but it's, I have this background of where I do like the ground, and I like dirt, and I like building stuff. Not as often, I surfed most of my life, and I spent a lot of time in the water. So that whole water thing, not to get too mushy, but anyway, so like when you pack that into and then all of your knowledge and stuff. So this is called Journal, and to me, each painting is some kind of journal into my life. So I'll take questions now, or answers. Thanks.
Thank you, Willie.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. We're going to turn the lights on, and Pat Warwick apparently has a question.
I do. When you start a painting, do you lay down blocks of color to start with?
Yes.
Actually, my question is very similar to hers, because You did mention in your presentation about foundations, laying foundations to your painting. So does it percolate then? I mean, once you lay the foundation down and you're building your painting, then how do you decide either what color or what shape or what image comes next in that particular process?
Yeah. So I think when I became conscious of the fact that all I was doing is dumping acrylic on top of freshly gessoed paint canvases, I thought, well, I'm not doing this arbitrarily. When it became like really super conscious of like, why am I doing this? Well, one is the urgency of getting going on a painting, where acrylic will dry faster and will set up faster so that I can get started. In the past, I used to only paint in oil, and it was painstakingly problematic. But the paintings were different too. They were definitely just all oil all the time. So I found that the acrylic, I call them anointing. So I would anoint the canvases and sometimes think of them as, oh, sometimes they're backlit and sometimes they're, you know, the light is coming from the back and sometimes the light's coming from the front. And so then I would alternate canvases. They say I had 7 or 8. A lot of times I'll start a body of work all at one time, because if it's summer, it's great to work on. I have these big easels that I can put the paintings on. I tie them down so the wind doesn't blow them away. But anyway, I'll take them as they dry, then put them up or leave them down and then do several baths of color and then mix the colors so that they're not just that certain blue or that certain red or yellow. Build up a complexity, and then also you're building up a crescendo, some sort of where's the energy going. And a lot of times you can't help that with a lot of pouring, but you can learn to dance with the canvas and move it. So like that's fun when nobody's watching. But anyway, it's like it gets more where I start applying.
So a lot of influences from the field painters.
A lot of influences.
From them, like from Helen Frankenthal.
Field painting?
Yeah.
Oh, the field paint. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes you find the oddest influences, like where you don't, people get like who your influences, then you start thinking, well, I've been through so many, it's tradition. I still feel like my work is traditional. It's not breaking new. You know, if you get into that head there, you just got to be who you are, and so you can't try to keep up with changing your momentum. It's to stay with the voice, but build and change. So I think the changing part is very important to painting. Keep changing it. Not changing it on purpose, like just to change it, but let them evolve.
There's a question over here. Other
I already
questions
answered
for
Mary's question.
Willy Heeks? Yes, one moment.
Hi, do you ever have an area of a painting that you absolutely adore, but it doesn't work within that painting?
Yeah,
And do you have to paint over it?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You kind of hate those. They kind of linger, and they're there, and you look at it and you go, time to go. So you can move on.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you get into that point where you're trying to save something, and then if you can work it out, you try everything to keep it, because it becomes the anchor in the painting. I mean, not like a complete focal part, but it energizes you for some reason, and you try to save it all. And sometimes just turn that painting over and try to put it behind you, yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Could you describe the feeling or how you know when a painting is complete?
Yeah. There are so many answers. You know, Andy Warhol's was when the check clears. Now, those are tricky. It's a tricky place, right? Right, where you. So you're living with this painting constantly, and you're working on it, and in each time, how much of our time do we spend like sitting in a chair looking at it, like So there's a lot of staring at that painting, wondering when that time comes where. So I found that if I found myself in the chair looking for too long of a time at it and don't feel like I have to get up and do something to it, it's pretty much, it's saying, okay, I'm okay. There are other indications, I think, when the energy you feel that it has in a, I say, logical way. As a painter, you think, if I do one more thing to that, I'm going to kill it. If I do one less thing to it, it'll stay alive. So it's that too. And only, you know, I think that's pretty much of a delicate balancing, like where it's finished. You know, like in the studio, if I have, sometimes I've had people over and look at paintings, and they'll look over at the wall where there's these unfinished paintings, like all just washes and stuff like that. They'll go, oh man, that's cool, man, that's nice. That's finished, isn't it? And I go, no, it's not finished. And if it was finished, it's somebody else's painting, not mine. But you know, you find yourself like, yeah, why not? Why not just leave all of these like half-done looking things, and then you have to change the name. So yeah, it's a very delicate, it's an exciting moment, I think. It shouldn't be like, it should be exhilarating, you know, where you almost feel like this euphoria. I mean, that's the feeling I get, is this, you know, because you've gotten it there, and now it's like, whoa.
Hi, my name is Beata. I'm also a painter. I do abstractions. But I want to really say thank you for being so generous and talking about your process. It's very inspirational, I have to say. But my question is, since you mentioned that photography was part of your artistic endeavor, I would like to ask you if have you ever taken pictures of your work between different stages, like digital images of paintings while it has been created?
Yeah.
And if you did, how did it enter to your practice? Is it
I
helpful?
Yeah.
Like working in different scale, if you work on the big scale and then you look at your digital image, it's a very different reading, how that affects the way when you walk on that particular piece.
Yeah, I think I get what you're asking. So there was a period of time that some friends of mine did that as a regular practice. They had the old Polaroids. They had a knack for like keeping a diary of the process of the painting being made. So I said, well, what are you doing this for? You know, they said, well, they like to see where and match it to the end result. Oh, well, this is how it came and this is how it developed. It's, but I think I would run out of film because I think, you know, and these paintings will start off like totally different and end up totally different than whence they came. And I didn't find anything constructive about it for me. But I could see if people are doing, maybe have a process where they have some kind of like a figurative aspect or a realist aspect to their painting and placing objects. And you can do that in more methodical painting processes, which don't involve too much slathering and brushing and as the way I work. But I do respect that method. But
yeah, I also am really enjoying the talk, and it is very inspiring because I'm a painter too.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in how you went through you said a difficult process of finding your voice. So I'm really curious about that. You know.
yeah. So I have a little bit of a gripe with academia, in a sense. It's not. I don't want to fight with academia, but I think that there's been philosophies about educating the artist. There have been a couple remarkable books written about the education of a young artist and how you're processed through art schools per se, or universities and up, and then all of a sudden it's graduate school. Well, I love people who love to teach. I think they're great. I think they're truly important. Obviously, a teacher was important to me. But I think the processing turns into a lot of how young artists can get swayed into trends. And the art world is like really guilty of like trend. Okay, and then you have the big landmarks of Impressionism, Expressionism, and all that. But then you have like a little bit of distraction, a lot of distraction goes on where people get led because of, social media is incredibly forceful. So it can take out a lot of what is personal. Your personal voice, it still could be, the subject matter can still be as important as like all of our issues in society. But I think finding your voice is difficult because you do get to feel like, oh, you have to do something to gain recognition, or it becomes important because it's about society. I mean, I still am faithful to, or still believe in, personal voices. And so when I use the word voice, it's not only, if you work, from deep inside of oneself, or if you're talking about issues in the world, racism, poverty, hunger, climate change, all those things that we have to live with every day, like on our, and yet there's a lot of people who work for and with those causes in mind, and still be their personal voice, and I appreciate that. But finding your own voice, to me, is texturally, how you find it is like how people immerse themselves in reading and looking at a lot of work and then feeling what's natural for them. And some of it can be so simple. To me, it was like, am I going to be a grid painter and tape off blocks of color? No, but do I love some grid painters? Yeah, but I couldn't do it. So it's things like that I think are more what I'm referring to about your voice. Then you have to work out all your influences and say, well, I'm not going to paint like Philip Guston for the rest of my life. I'm not going to paint like Pollock, and also their causes were different in their time, and therefore what they created, that body of work, is nourishment, but it's not to be imitated, but it's to bring it in, and then get through it. A friend of mine was so stuck on Guston. Most of her life she was painting just, stop it. And, she eventually grew out of it. And she was a good painter. But the thing is, you'd walk by thinking it was the Philip Guston later paintings. That's when you get so immersed that it can be a trap. Challenging yourself, it's good.
Yes.
It takes a certain amount of courage to be out on that limb where you have taken in all that you can learn from those around you, and then you begin to explore your own inner landscape and then try to produce that in a form that pleases you. Had there ever been moments when you just wondered if it was going to come through or not in a painting or any that you're doing, your own voice? Or have you always had a sense of your own voice?
No. Well, to go deep, one of the things that I didn't want to do is ignore my early life, not in that literal sense, but in a deep sense. So there's a lot of introspection that I went through. I considered myself, I would call it very introspective, as a child, which is a good trait to have. But if you take the deepness of that, which means a kind of mulling over and sort of a examination of just the visual aspect of what's around you. So I remember staring at, as a kid, we all stare at wallpaper, but I would stare at the wallpaper, see the pattern, old wallpaper especially, see the pattern, and then I would see the cross pattern and the knot pattern. Then it somehow gets into the areas of the cracked wallpaper, and then, how does that cracked wallpaper? So what I'm just saying is introspection and close examination. So that's early. So yeah, how can I explain it? So that stuff is personal. It's not even about art. Then you go to art school, and it's like finding a voice was to me was, and what I was taught by Emile, and what you do is you try all these things. Academic teaching of art involves going to museums where people sketch great sculptures. Well, that's the understanding it. Life drawing is great. I do this stuff, but I think life drawing is great. I'm not against it. So the thing is, going through all those things, it's almost you practice it, and then you sort it out. No, eventually. But I think with abstraction, because I started reading a lot of poetry and listening to a lot of abstract music, Schoenberg, and back then I got involved in philosophy, reading philosophy, and I thought, what's wrong with the idea of when you make pictures, you're inventing a picture. So I'm inventing pictures, and it's not making a picture that depends on the picture before. I love when my work gets, each piece is personalized. So they're like individuals. So it's not a rote one to the other. There is connectedness, but each is an event, each is a made-up invention.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to say I really love your work. It's beautiful, inspiring, and really pulls you in. You want to keep going back over and see what's going on in there, like you talked about the layers. I guess the question I have is that you work pretty large. Do you find that if you're working smaller, does it become more confining? Do you feel like you're exerting too much control? And when you work large, you kind of can't, because it kind of gets almost out of your physical space.
There is an adjustment, and so for the most part, it's hard to jump from. I generally work on several things that are up at the same time. And then if I get to a point where I'm unknowing where to go, so I'll turn that painting around, and because I don't know, so just go away for a while and then bring out another one. So there is an adjustment to scale.
Yeah.
So if I'm working on, because most of the time if I'm working on a group of, well, say works on paper, that range from like 50 inches down to this size, yes. So that's why I do work on those all at the same time. If I were to jump over to a big canvas, yes, there's an adjustment that you make. And generally, you can't do both at the same time. You know, what I like in small works is when small works seem like big works. When they're finished, they say, wow, that feels like a big, small painting. So what happens is you think normally, relatively speaking, you keep on shrinking it and fitting in as many marks into a smaller space, but no, it doesn't work that way.
Thank you. What I think was really exciting about the things you told us this evening, you kind of revealed some of your own personal problem sets, the way you approach the paintings, the works, and maybe your drawings too. Do you often, or maybe there's two ways you work, or maybe more, do you approach the canvas with a problem set in mind, like I want the light to come from the back, or I want to resolve some kind of problem that I've been working out for a while, or do you do something else?
No, because to me, it gets so subconscious. When I get to working, I don't remember, oh yeah, that's like a problem solving and a conscious effort to deal with that. But no, the painting begins like informing. And so if it starts as a kind of dark images on
So it talks
top
back to you.
Yeah, so then what happens is just it connects something to something else, and then wash it away and move it with your hand and rub your shirt.
Let's give it up now for Willy Heeks. So
Thank you. Thank you very much.